Can AI replace the CoSec and you have a CoSec agent?
Absolutely, positively not. CoSec is here to stay.
The Fund AI Pod is a weekly podcast and video about AI use in the asset management and funds industry. In today's episode, we interview a well-known Irish independent non-executive director. We discuss the Ireland government's approach to AI, a new Irish community called AI Squared that is advocating for the adoption of AI in all of Ireland, the impact of AI to funds boards, directors, and CoSecs, and AI use in fund management companies. This episode is brought to you by Zentia, helping asset managers and fund service providers identify and implement real AI use cases in their workflows. And now for our main episode. Hi, I'm your host, Iain Carey, and today we have a special guest with us, Bernard Hanratty. Bernard's got a long storied history in funds, technology, AI, and industry advocacy. And today we're going to talk about all those topics with him. Bernard, welcome to the pod.
Thank you.
Why don't we start with your career background and a bit about yourself?
Sure. I spent 30 years at Citi, most of which was involved in the investment funds industry. And whilst I'm sure I did lots of wonderful things for Citi, what opportunity it gave me most was to be involved in the funds industry itself and to work with colleagues across industry to make it the $5 trillion business that it is today.
So you started in the funds industry and then...
No, the funds industry didn't exist when I started in 1984. It only started in the early 90s. I was one of a number of people, mostly in our late 20s and early 30s, who embraced this new emerging industry. And at a recent funds industry dinner, I saw that I was president or chairman of Irish funds over 25 years ago. There aren't many people in their early 30s now who get the privilege of being the chairman of the industry.
Fantastic. Interesting. And I have been in Ireland for 2 years and I've known you through the funds industry. And I would say you're one of the tech savvy AI entrepreneurial directors out there. Where did that interest in technology grow from?
I was the second year ever to do a full-time computer science course in Trinity College. So I graduated in 84, and my early days in banking was putting computer terminals and then IBM PCs into customers' offices so they could do their banking online. So I've had an interest kind of from way back then. In the middle of my career, I did a lot of work with a supplier to Citi and designed an entire system for something we called asset pooling. So I got heavily involved then. And then when I left Citi 11 years ago, I set up my own fintech company. It didn't go very far, but I did, and I enjoyed that whole process. So I guess technology has been present in pretty much for all of my career.
So you had exposure. I mean, fantastic that you launched your own company, very entrepreneurial, that got you involved in technology. Where did your interest in AI start with? How did you get exposed to it?
My first exposure was when one of the PhD for AI hubs in in Cork, came to present to a board of a bank on which I sat. And without being unkind, I felt they didn't do a very good job representing themselves. So I reached out and said, I think I can help you do a better job. Present your case. But really what happened was 6 months later, Irish Funds had a technology seminar that I attended, and my perception was everybody was being very cautious. Let's walk before we run. Let's be aware of the obligations imposed upon us by the EU AI Act. And I stood up from the floor and said, where's the ambition? Because I went back to that period in the early 90s when we were launching the IFSC, and I wanted to see a similar level of ambition and energy around our adoption of AI now that we had in setting up the funds industry 30 years ago.
You brought up the EU AI Act there. That was first proposed a few years ago, only came into effect recently. So when exactly did you start to look into AI and realize this is something that needs to be applied to the funds industry and you need to get up to speed on it?
I was receiving briefings on the EU AI Act from the early days, just through board presentations and looking at the regulatory radar, what's coming down the pipe, things that you need to be aware of. Regulation has the capacity to assume identities and associations way beyond the intended breadth of that. And I would include SFDR in terms of sustainability and GDPR in terms of privacy, where those regulations are often thrown out as an excuse for not doing something, when in fact the particular something in question does not come within the scope of either of those pieces of regulation. So I took a deep dive into the EU AI Act to make sure I was crystal clear about where it did and where it did not apply. And particularly looking through the lens of the funds industry, we are generally not determining who's going to get a new heart, or who gets, yes, clearly there is some element of who gets a job, but we were in the low and medium risk. We were nowhere near high risk in terms of the deployment of AI. And therefore, I was keen to make sure that people weren't blinded into stagnation by virtue of concerns about the AI Act without properly understanding its content.
That's a very good point, in that there's the potential negative side, but there's also the positive side. There's AI literacy to ensure you know what there is to do with it, and ethics and responsibility. A lot of that is covered in EU AI Act as a framework. What is the role then of the Irish government to regulate and oversee it, to promote it, but also then to look at the potential side effects of it as well?
Sure. So there's some good work being done here by the government. They have identified 8 bodies who have responsibility for essentially ethical deployment of AI and human rights. And they have recently appointed 15 bodies who are responsible for regulation. And that crosses a whole number of different sectors of industry and public service generally. So in that respect, we're pretty well advanced. There's reasonable grounds to say that because the big social media companies are in Ireland and the data protection commissioners are at the bleeding edge of what's happening in Europe on data protection, then a lot of that expertise can be rolled over and taken advantage of in the context of the regulatory and public interest bodies that are there. The AI Act required the government to designate such bodies, and what they have decided to do is to do it on a federated basis rather than create a brand new regulator or public interest body, all of which I think is fine. There's been a lot of conversation over the last number of weeks about the National AI Office, which isn't going to be stood up until the 1st of August next year. So it's a little bit hard to anticipate what it's going actually to function as.
Is there been any remit outlined of what the National AI Office will cover and the scope and responsibilities?
There is some broad definitions, which is essentially to coordinate all the different organs of the state, both public and, to a degree, activities happening in the private sector, so that we are cohesive and united in our approach to the adoption of AI. So it's a laudable idea. And there is a parallel entity, and I don't know quite whether this will come under the auspices of the National AI Office or not, called the AI Observatory. And the purpose here is a bit like the Central Statistics Office, where we have our finger on the pulse of what's happening with regard to job displacement, what's happening with regard to new job creation, what's happening in terms of the reinvention and redefinition of jobs. So this is one of the biggest concerns, and it's a very legitimate concern. So therefore, if we have our finger on the pulse through the AI Observatory, we can start to make interventions to try to protect civil society as a whole against the consequences of AI deployment.
Okay, so it sounds as if there's a national framework looking at it, but we know that AI moves quite quickly, or very quickly. And I would expect then that the funds industry, especially in Ireland, would need to take some initiatives to set out some guidance for its members and the industry. You have been part of the Irish funds before. I'd be curious to know what your thoughts on Irish funds and their approach, but also what else we could do or are doing in the funds industry or across Ireland that impacts the funds industry from an AI adoption, education, advocacy point of view.
Sure. Irish funds have taken a great leadership position by putting an AI chatbot on the front of their website so that members can interrogate past papers, regulatory matters, and a massive archive of data using an AI bot to achieve that. So Irish funds have done a really good job as an entity itself to embrace AI and to put that as a good use case out there. There's a working group, I will get the name wrong, but call it Technology and Innovation. And they have done quite a number of seminars around AI and innovation. And I think that is one of the most important things that we can do. I think telling stories and giving people practical use cases that have been deployed using AI is the most valuable way of educating people. And as you know, I've just recently launched a new organization called AI Squared, the tagline of which is empowering sectoral AI adoption. So what I'm trying to do is, using the funds industry as a test case, use the strong foundation that exists to create, again, a collaborative way for all members of the industry to learn more, both in terms of simple literacy. So there's an opportunity for the funds industry to collaborate in a more constructive way and even to work on joint projects across members of the community so that everybody can benefit.
That sounds very interesting. And I would imagine that the funds industry is a good sector to be the poster child as a test run, just given the use of technology, regulations. What you learn from that industry would be quite applicable across others. But if we could just go back to AI Squared and double click on that, what exactly is this Is it initiative, working group? What is it? What's their mission? What's their pillars?
The AI Squared has been established 6 months after a group of us met in the Shelburne Hotel last March. And everybody in that room felt that there was a vacuum in the ecosystem that facilitated a pulling together of all the different strands of activity to create a whole that the value of which is much greater than the sum of the parts. And I'm talking about academia, the startup world, government policy, enterprise, and big tech. If you take those as kind of 5 sectors of the AI ecosystem. And we have sort of, we came up with the name AI Squared. So you can understand AI and Ireland. The extra A could be adoption, acceleration, advocacy, alliance, and a whole load of other A's that you may wish. But we decided rather than elaborating, keeping it really tight and just call it AI Squared. So we have decided that we're going to, in the first place, adopt a model inspired by open source software and technology, but also inspired by industry clusters. Both of those have collaboration and sharing at the heart of what it is they do. So we have decided that we're going to focus our efforts around 4 key pillars: education and literacy, advocacy, safe and trustworthy AI, and then adoption. Now, adoption we feel is a very big pillar, so we have 3 sub-pillars within that: academic partnerships, enterprise and the startup ecosystem, and then public and community sector. So we only had our launch last week. We have our next public meeting in 9 weeks' time, on the September 27th, when we intend to launch our charter, and we will have the first set of projects that we have agreed to pursue. We will have ready to publish and to discuss in greater detail.
Fantastic. And this isn't a corporate for-profit.
No.
It's all about trying to promote, share, collaborate, inspire.
Correct.
Etc.
Correct. And if I could be so bold, maybe in a year's time, we won't need to exist, because the National AI Office will have stepped in to do precisely what it is we're doing.
And where can people find out more about AI Squared?
There's a website, which is aiai.ie.
And is there a LinkedIn group?
There is a LinkedIn group also, AI Squared, and you will see recent posts from me, through which you can find access to the group. And in the spirit of open source, we have a GitHub repo or repository in which we will house all of the presentations that were made at the launch last Thursday.
One thing I would add, because I did attend the launch last Thursday, was there's a resource that the group has put together which buckets all the initiatives, working groups across those 4 pillars that is done at a academic, national level, that you could then access to effectively see in is it a map or a...
Yeah, it's a Trello board.
Trello board.
Yeah.
And that helps because, as you said, there's lots of different initiatives and many overlap. And what I found AI Squared does quite well is it's attempting to bring it all together to have one succinct way to link it all in, to see where they integrate, overlap, or make sense in terms of the concepts.
Yeah. Yeah. if I may just add that on the morning of last Thursday, there was an event hosted by William Fry Insight and Adapt called the National AI Leadership Forum. And we were very pleased as AI Squared to have been invited to participate in that. And in fact, there was a segment on Morning Ireland on RTE at 7:45 on this meeting. And it was 100 people in the room collectively driving AI nationally. So it was great, firstly, to identify as a group as a whole. But I did take the opportunity to speak and say that much of what was being discussed is, firstly, things that should be done without being really clear about either whom or by when it should be done. And B, talked about use cases, which were all individual companies, what individual groups or individual companies may have achieved as a use case. So I said, one, we're launching this thing today, so we're already moving in terms of getting AI Squared off the ground. And two, that I felt, particularly in light of the Irish presidency of the EU in the second half of 26, when we might have an AI summit in Ireland, if we could evidence a sectoral adoption of AI as a use case rather than individual company adoption of AI, it would be a far more powerful message in terms of Ireland's approach to AI as a whole.
That's a good segue to look into AI usage in the funds industry then. But before we do, you started your career, you mentioned Citi, long history there, you did a fintech. You're now an independent non-executive director in INED. For the audience, what is an INED? What do they do? Why do we need them?
An INED, or Independent Non-Executive Director, sits on the board of regulated companies to provide guidance in terms of regulation, strategy, and compliance to the people who are charged with running the company, with the executives. And typically, independent directors will have been of the industry, so they understand the domain area very well. But one of the most challenging things is to learn and go through the transition of being non-executive, where you are not responsible for doing stuff. So there's a governance guru called Niamh Brennan, and she says, eyes in and hands out. Okay, so you're looking all the time for things that you feel aren't quite right, or things that might need a little bit of a nudge in one direction or another, but you never do the doing, because that's the executive's role. And if you stray across that line, you lose your independence, because you're actually the person who did the doing, so you can't look at it independently anymore.
Fair. That, though, then brings to the question of AI literacy. As a director, like you said, you need to be aware and overseeing, but not necessarily doing. So what level of AI literacy does a director need? Because funds, asset management companies are either already dabbling with AI, using it full-heartedly, or looking to go into this area. So as a director, what level do they need to know about it to be able to guide and oversee and be compliant versus needing to be detailed technical experts,
Right.
for example?
So the often referred to EU AI Act has a requirement that companies who use AI give appropriate training to their staff members about how to use it in a safe and ethical way. So for those users of AI, then the There is generally training done that is available. It's high level, but it gives a basic understanding of how it is you use AI. However, as a board director, you're less concerned about your role and your education in the use of AI and more concerned about how it is AI is deployed within the company itself. So, how many agents are being used? To what purpose are they being applied? What level of human oversight is there of the output from those various AI agents? And indeed, has AI been used in the preparation of the materials that are now presented to you in your board pack? So, standard literacy does not achieve what is required or expected of a board member in terms of their management and oversight of the deployment of AI within the company.
There were some really good examples you gave of questions to be asked or hopefully disclosed by the funds. Is there any industry practice or standards around, as you mentioned, number of agents or even that AI is being used? Has there been anything agreed across working bodies, the industry, to say these disclosures should be made if you're using AI?
I don't believe there's anything on an industry level yet. This might give me a chance to express some thoughts on how it is AI Squared might collaborate with Irish funds. When it comes to literacy, we could develop training modules using use cases that are specific to the funds administration business and to investment management generally, rather than using sort of generic everyday examples to which we then need to try to translate into what it is we do on a day-to-day basis. Possibly even more valuable is bringing people through the principles of trustworthiness and ethics, which was set out in an EU paper in 2019. And again, to look at the 10 different strands of transparency and ethics that are set out in that document through the lens of the funds industry.
So we spoke about AI use in the boards and board packs. It could even be used to generate the board packs, which hopefully people do disclose what is AI generated or not. Where else could AI be used in the board to give insights or benefits to the board?
I think it's interesting to look at how we can prepare reports for a board using AI, give much deeper insight than what is traditionally presented. I was speaking at an event a year ago, and we were talking about CP86, the management company regulations. And I said that I felt that the presentation of the management company report to boards was overly mechanical. It looks too much in a backward direction, but only for the last quarter. What's interesting is not necessarily what the balance sheet says at the end of the quarter. What's interesting is what the P&L has shown over the last 6 quarters. So you can look at the trend analysis, and that gives you a sense of how good things are today relative to the last 5 reports that were produced. AI is excellent at reviewing a series of documents and identifying trends, for example. So that's a place where, in terms of the board, the AI could be very beneficial.
And what about a much talked about topic is corporate secretarial, CoSec. The ability for auto transcription is there. There's the ability to then summarize that transcription. That could be seen as an efficiency play, but there's obviously certain considerations It's not that simple. So walk us through, can AI replace the CoSec and you have a CoSec agent? If not, why not?
Okay. Absolutely, positively not.
Explain for us.
CoSec is here to stay. We have seen advancements in the modality of the performance of the CoSec role over the last 2 decades. The most simple one is somebody put a dictaphone on the table and said, we're going to record the meeting just in case we need to get any quotes right or whatever else. Yeah. And then we started using board portals. I mean, there was a time all board packs were printed and then they were all shredded afterwards. And now we have board portals, but board portals are now designed so that if you make annotations on your board pack electronically, you can delete the annotations and just leave the board pack as it originally was. There was a lot of resistance to that as a concept. We now have AI systems that will produce transcriptions, but no board minutes are made up from a stenographer's, setting out every word that was spoken during the course of a meeting. And I have seen examples where meeting minutes have suddenly got doubled in size because there's a lazy approach taken by the CoSec that uses too much of the transcription and doesn't actually use the qualitative skill that says, let's get the essence of that conversation and capture the essence of the conversation rather than actually the who said what to whom version of that conversation. And then the final point is, and this has been true forever, is the signed minutes of the meeting will represent the official record of what happened at that board meeting. So it's really important for all directors, and particularly the chairperson, who's the person signing the minutes, that they feel it's a true reflection of the presentation. True reflection of the meeting.
So very clear that you think won't be replaced, but could AI complement or support the CoSec? In the example, such as you said, the dictaphone helps just to play it back. Could an agent be used to record, summarize, and then the CoSec reviews that against their own notes and then rewrites the draft to capture the essence, as you say?
It can be used as a tool. Absolutely.
And I think the key thing here is the expectation is the recording of that meeting and the transcription would be deleted because
would be deleted because it's the signed minutes is the official record of what was conducted at that time.
Then moving on to fund management companies. Lots of managers know they need to use AI in either their operations, their investment management process, or even their investor engagement. You're on working groups to promote the adoption of AI. Naturally, it's best for people to start with small cases to get used to it, build some momentum. So what would be your advice to a fund management company looking to use AI? What would be 1 or 2 use cases that you think is common, easy enough to solve, to get started on?
Well, the things that people need to be mindful of as they start their journey is, what model are you going to use to process which data? And is that data public or private? And is that data further training the model, or is the model, is it independent of the model and how it is the model is trained? And by far, the easiest place to start is, for example, in your human resources department or your people department, so that people, if they've got questions on maternity and paternity leave, sick leave, holiday entitlement, that you have a chatbot sitting on the front of that scours all the various policies and procedures in order to give a swift response to an individual that says, this is what you're entitled to.
Effectively a knowledge management agent.
Effectively a knowledge management agent. But we know that AI is really good at processing words. Yeah.
And I would agree that that's one of the quickest wins, because you can set up specific agents for HR, training of new staff. If you put all your procedures, training documents, material that you want them to learn, if they have a question, how do I open up a custody account at my custodian? If that's documented, they can just ask the chatbot and it gives them the information with a link to the underlying
Correct.
source data that it's pulled from.
Correct. Now, another area where we know AI is really good is writing code and reviewing code. So it's possible to have AI bots that will, for example, do bug fixes, so that you have an AI bot that looks through thousands and thousands of lines of software code and identifies inconsistencies or breaks, and wouldn't automatically fix them, but would produce a report of recommendations as to where there might be some modifications to software code being done. This is it's a big field, AI and writing code, and using an agent for bug fixing, and then ultimately to assist in the writing of software is also very valuable. Now, neither of those are specific to the asset management industry, but it is important for companies to start having use cases that are in less sensitive areas in order to become familiar with the process and start developing a sense of control on how all of these things work.
The only area I would say where it is relevant, though, in the asset management industry is if you have quant or asset managers that are already leveraging machine learning. They have their own in-house developers, coders, etc., to build those algorithms for trading.
Yeah.
They would naturally already be looking at this, I'd say. Whereas I think we're keen to make sure the broader industry is looking at this. So when it comes to fund management companies, they are dealing with both non-PII information, PII information. So there's obviously GDPR implications, there's ethics, governance, there's a lot of implications. So having a key governance and oversight at a management company of the use of AI across their firm is critical. So what are some best practices that managers of funds need to look at when they are seeking to implement AI?
Sure. The first place to start is having an AI policy, because an AI policy forces a company to think through how to align the adoption of AI with its own ethics, with the regulations to which it's subject, and its governance standards. And the policy will typically set out some operational details at a high level, which will include an AI oversight committee. And therefore, any intention by a business unit to deploy AI within its operations would have to submit a report to the AI oversight committee, who would look at the model, the data, accessibility, training, human in the loop, and other dimensions associated with that project to decide whether to approve it or not.
Should the board be reviewing and signing off on these AI policies, or is this something that can be kept at a manager level or fund level?
I think the board has a responsibility to oversee the policy itself, but not to get involved in the weeds of the individual projects. But it should have metrics to say how many projects have been presented, what area of the business are they intended to be deployed within, how many have been rejected, is there a quantitative score in terms of transparency, responsibility, and ethics that has been determined for the particular project. So there should be a dashboard giving directors sort of updated information in terms of the extent to which AI is being deployed within the enterprise.
And you would expect that sort of information to be in the standard board pack on an ongoing, say, quarterly basis? Or is that something that's a one-off and annual if we're talking best practices?
So I would expect reporting to be done quarterly. But the reality is that most companies involved in the funds industry in Ireland are subsidiaries of much larger groups. And much of the trailblazing in respect of the deployment of AI happens at a group level, not within the subsidiary. So it can be very difficult to get data on a legal entity basis that says this is the extent to which AI is being deployed in the company for which I have fiduciary responsibility.
Is there a solution to that, or it's a data problem?
Ideally, when the group procedures are being set up, they are mindful of the responsibilities of the legal entities within the group, and they set up a tagging process. It's not very complex. That simply says the deployment of this piece of technology is relevant to company A, B, C, D, and E in the following countries, so that then reports can be done on those companies A, B, C, D, E to say, give me a schedule of the exposure that this company has to the AI deployment within the group as a whole.
Excellent, Bernard. This has been a really insightful meeting. I've learnt a lot, and I'm sure there'll be more to come from AI Squared, so we'll all stay tuned there. Where can people find you on LinkedIn?
So LinkedIn is simply Bernard Hanratty. There aren't too many of us. So that's the main place. And you'll see me at a funds industry event on a regular basis around the city.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the pod.
Great. We're delighted to be here. Thanks, Iain.
Thanks for tuning in. If you're enjoying these discussions on AI in the funds industry, please like and subscribe. I'm a new podcast, so it helps grow the audience. And if you have a funds AI story to share, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's Iain Carey, IAINCAREY. Thanks again. See you on the next episode.